is that those who campaigned to leave the European Union had no blueprint for what they would do if they won the referendum. But the government are now repeating that mistake. So can the Prime Minister tell the House what plans are being put in place if, as it now seems likely, the government loses the vote on the 12th of December? What preparations are being put in place for either extending Article 50 or for preparations for a people's vote to put this question to the country?
Well, I've answered both Article 50 and the People's Vote question in response to other questions. And my focus is on this deal and the fact that this is the deal that is good for the United Kingdom because it delivers on the Brexit vote in a way that protects.
Sir Edward Lee.
If it is indeed true that both the government and the European Union believe that this backstop will be temporary, will the Prime Minister take an opportunity before the meaningful vote, or indeed accept an amendment to the meaningful vote, to make absolutely clear that if, by the end of the due date of this Parliament, we are still held in this backstop, still held in customs arrangements against our will, she will abrogate those parts of the treaty and restore our national sovereignty?
I say to my honourable friend, and he, I know, has raised the question with me before about whether the extent to which we are able to pull out of these treaty arrangements, and he and I are corresponding on that particular matter. Can I say to him that it is not only is it the clear intent of both parties using their best endeavours in good faith in these documents to ensure that we are able to have the future relationship in place by the end of December 2020, and thereafter, should it be the case that an alternative arrangement has to be in place for Northern Ireland, it should be only for a temporary period of time, backstop or other arrangement, because it is not a given that that would be the backstop. It is my firm intention, there's a lot of voices saying it, but it is not a given that that would be the backstop. But it is my firm intention to ensure that at the end of this Parliament we are all able to look the British people clearly in the eye and say, we've delivered on Brexit, we've delivered on what you wanted to ensure, which was an end to free movement, an end to the jurisdiction of the European Court, and an end to sending vast sums of money to Europe every year.
Caroline Flint.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has made it very clear that at all costs she wants to avoid a no-deal Brexit. My right honourable friend, the Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition, has also reassured Labour MPs that that's his priority, to avoid a no-deal Brexit. Now, given there are some 80 Conservative backbenchers who will vote against any deal, come what may, in the national interest, will the Prime Minister sit down with my right honourable friend, the member for Islington North, and have a meaningful discussion about how we make sure that when it comes to workers' rights, health and safety, we do not fall behind and we secure a sustainable customs arrangement going forward?
Can I say to the Right Honourable Lady that what we have done in the proposals we put forward in the White Paper, what we have done in the political declaration, is to ensure that we do look for that free trade area, that appropriate customs arrangement that is going to deliver on jobs for people, and I'm interested that she has indicated that her right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, is clear that we should leave the European Union with a deal, because previously he had indicated that he would vote against any deal that the government brought back.
Dame Cheryl Gillan.
Nobody can fail to acknowledge the personal commitment and determination and best intentions of the Prime Minister. If this House does not pass the agreement, could the Prime Minister confirm that she has ruled out extending the negotiating period or even purchasing an extension to that period?
The extension of the negotiating period will be an extension of Article 50. I'm clear that we will not extend Article 50 and that we will leave the EU on the 29th of March next year.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, my constituents got the desperate news of 241 job losses at Vauxhall Motors Ellesmere Port, bringing the total to 900 job losses since the referendum. When this government won't even do the basics to help automotive industries, like ending the discrimination on business rates, how on earth, Mr. Speaker, are my constituents supposed to trust this government's political wish list about their economic future?
The Honourable Lady, of course, I'm sorry to hear of the job losses at Vauxhall in her constituency. Can I also say to the Honourable Lady that there are many examples that we have seen in the automotive industry of extra investment going into this country in the automotive industry. There are many examples we have seen, and indeed she references what the government is doing. Government has been working very closely with the automotive industry. We are keen to ensure that this country is a country that is at leading edge of the automotive industry in the future. It's exactly what we're doing with autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles.
Christopher Chope.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the government published what it describes as the explainer for the political declaration. Page 1 of that explainer includes the following sentence: "The political declaration and the withdrawal agreement have been settled together on the basis that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed." In the light of my right honourable friend's responses to my right honourable friend for Sevenoaks and my right honourable friend for Horton Price and Howden, why, if that sentence is correct, does it not mean that the 39 billion is contingent upon us getting agreement on the future arrangements?
Can I say the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration were indeed agreed together, but I repeat the point that I've made to others, that it is the case that there, in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in relation to leaving the European Union, there will be legal obligations of a financial nature that this country has to abide by.
Sammy Wilson.
The ink was hardly dry on this agreement before the French President was saying that he would be using the legally binding provisions of this agreement to lever further concessions on fishing and other issues from the UK Government. And other states are no doubt thinking the same. Does the Prime Minister not recognise that by signing this legally binding agreement, she is handing the EU a cudgel which it will use to mug us for the second time when it comes to the negotiations on the future trade arrangements?
No, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, no, I don't agree that. And I referenced earlier, and I'm happy to do so again, the remarks that were made by the French President in relation to the backstop and in relation to access to fishing. And I will repeat the point, which is a very simple one, which is if the backstop is exercised, we will be outside the common fisheries policy, and it will be the United Kingdom that would determine which boats have access to UK waters.
Stephen Crabb.
Agree that as a party of government we have a responsibility not just to embody the divisions that exist in a country on this issue, but to try to bridge them and to fix them. And to that end, isn't it the case that her deal on the table has the overwhelming advantage of it being the only one grounded in reality that gives us a chance to move forward so we don't keep going around the same mountain again and again?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, first of all, I think he is absolutely right about the responsibility which members of this House have. And secondly, I would say to him this: there are many, in many circumstances, including in this, where people can wish that something was different from what it is. But the reality is, as the European Union has made clear, that there would be no agreement without a backstop. So without a backstop there would be no deal, and that this is the deal. This, I believe, is a good deal for the UK, and I believe it's the right deal for the UK.
McKinnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister knows fine well that there is no dividend to be had from this withdrawal agreement. Under all economic analysis, we will be worse off for decades to come. So is it not time for the Prime Minister to level with the British public and accept that because this decision needs to be taken as a political fix rather than an economically rational decision, that it is one that should be put back to the people who started this process back in 2016, and we will continue to ask for that until it does so.
Thank you, Honourable Lady. As she has heard, I'm very clear that we should leave the European Union because the vote of the British people was to leave the EU. It may be the policy of others. I don't know if it's the honourable lady's. By the sound of it, she would rather we stayed in the European Union. I don't think that would be right. I think that would be betraying the trust that the people put in us.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I urge the Prime Minister, when she hears cries of no surrender, as some members of this House want to drag us to a no-deal Brexit, that would be catastrophic for my constituents in Eddisbury? And can she remind those members of the House that the Conservative manifesto made commitments to a deep and special partnership and a comprehensive customs arrangement with Europe? Does this deal deliver on that?
Yes, I'm happy to tell my honourable friend that this deal does indeed deliver on that manifesto commitment.
Vera Hobhouse.
Mr. Speaker, under this agreement from January 2021, foreign nationals who fly from a third country into Dublin, then travel on to Belfast, and from then to the rest of the UK, where will the immigration border be?
But the common travel area will continue to exist. One of the things that's been agreed in the withdrawal agreement.
Sir Desmond Swayne.
So, if you want to continue watching this particular debate, BBC Parliament has continuous coverage of events in the House of Commons. But that's it from Afternoon Live. Coming up, the news at 5, and that is with Hugh Edwards, who can tell me what's going to be in it.
I was just remarking, Simon, that there are lots of MPs still getting up. So I reckon there are at least 30 who still want to ask questions, so there's quite a bit of life in this session yet. However, we're going to be taking stock at 5, just reflecting on what's been going on for 90 minutes. Relentless attack, really, on the Prime Minister and these plans. Just one or two voices being more polite, like Stephen Crabb, we just saw him just now. So we're going to just take stock, and then we'll probably go back into the chamber for the end of this statement. But it doesn't bode well for that parliamentary vote in a few weeks' time.
I'm going to rush home.
I think you should.
That's at 5 with you. But now let's have a look at the weather with Chris Fawkes. Say, Chris Fawkes.
Hello again. Many of us have had a dry day today, but across some eastern coasts of Scotland and England we have seen some showers here. They've not really been moving very far inland because there's no wind to push them along, really, so that's where showers will continue to be as we look at the weather picture into this evening. Now, through the evening and overnight, the showers could get a bit heavier across eastern areas of Scotland. A bit of snow in the hills, so things could get a little bit slippery here for a time. It's going to be a chilly night as well, temperatures getting down into low single figures widely. However, where we do see some lengthy cloud breaks, temperatures dipping below, there'll be some patches of frost around. Signs of a change towards the southwest as we see a band of rain approach towards the end of the night. And that wet weather will make its presence felt across southwest England, Wales and Northern Ireland through the day on Tuesday. Ahead of the weather front, we're still into the cool air. A lot of dry weather, a few showers across northeastern areas of Scotland, but it is turning much milder into the southwest as we go through the day. That's your latest weather.
Now here's the science bit.
Ready. Could a bendy phone be the future?
There really is no driver.
Oh,
Feel better for that.
Click. Saturday and Sunday at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.
Today at 5. Theresa May has been facing widespread criticism as she appeals to MPs to back her Brexit deal. A day after striking the deal in Brussels, Theresa May went to Parliament to warn that rejecting the deal would cause more uncertainty and division.
We can back this deal, deliver on the vote of the referendum, and move on to building a brighter future of opportunity and prosperity for all our people. or this House can choose to reject this deal and go back to square one.
But the Prime Minister's deal was widely criticised on both sides of the House.
This deal does not have the support of either side of this House or the country as a whole. Mr. Speaker, ploughing on is not stoic. It's an act of national self-harm.
The Prime Minister and the whole House knows the mathematics. This will never get through. And even if it did, which it won't, the DUP, on who we rely for a majority, have said they would then review the confidence and supply agreement.
In other news, pardoned and freed by the United Arab Emirates, the British academic Matthew Hedges, who'd been sentenced to life in prison for spying.
He's a PhD researcher. His colleagues know it, and his family know it, and hundreds of academics around the world know it, and that's all that matters. I mean, the most important thing really is that now we'll have him back home safely.
British summers could be 5 degrees hotter by 2070 if greenhouse gas emissions aren't cut, according to new Met Office projections. The first spacecraft designed to study the internal structure of Mars is set to attempt a difficult landing on the planet tonight. Welcome to the BBC News at 5. Let's go straight to Westminster and join my colleague Hugh Edwards.
Martine, many thanks. Prime Minister has been presenting her case to MPs for backing the Brexit plans that were signed off in Brussels over the weekend. Mrs May has been on her feet now for over 90 minutes. She has faced, I think it's fair to say, relentless criticism from all sides as she urged MPs to think carefully about the parliamentary vote that is coming up on December the 12th. There is no shortage of Conservative MPs, certainly, who are already committed to voting against the deal. Labour also rejected the Prime Minister's argument that the choice was between this deal or no deal. Mrs May warned that rejecting the agreement would provoke even more division and uncertainty throughout the UK. Let's have a flavour of the debate so far. We'll start with what the Prime Minister had to say.
I can say to the House with absolute certainty that there is not a better deal available. And my fellow leaders were very clear on that themselves yesterday. Our duty as a Parliament over these coming weeks is to examine this deal in detail, to debate it respectfully, to listen to our constituents and decide what is in our national interest. There is a choice which this House will have to make. We can back this deal, deliver on the vote of the referendum, and move on to building a brighter future of opportunity and prosperity for all our people. Or this House can choose to reject this deal and go back to square one. Because no one knows what would happen if this deal doesn't pass. It would open the door to more division and more uncertainty, with all the risks that will entail.
And there you have the heart of the Prime Minister's message to MPs in the House of Commons today, that to turn this down in a few weeks' time would be to sow more uncertainty and division, and indeed lead to far more questions. The answer from the opposition benches, from Labour, from Jeremy Corbyn, the party leader, he said it was a botched deal. He urged Mrs May to start working on what he called a Plan B.
This deal does not have the support of either side of this House or the country as a whole. Mr. Speaker, ploughing on is not stoic. It's an act of national self-harm. Instead of threatening this House with a no-deal scenario or a no-Brexit scenario, the Prime Minister now needs to prepare a Plan B, something her predecessors failed to do.
So the response, I have to say, on all sides of the House, if you weren't watching a while ago, let me just tell you, it was pretty universally critical, not just on the Labour benches, the Scottish National Party, the Unionists in Northern Ireland, but certainly too on the Conservative benches. Just one or two voices expressing, I suppose, admiration for what the Prime Minister's done in terms of her dedication and hard work over recent months, but really very critical indeed of the detail of the deal. Boris Johnson, Ian Duncan-Smith, lots of the prominent Brexit supporters among them. Let's listen to them now.
It's very hard to see how this deal can provide certainty to business or to anyone else when you have half the cabinet going around reassuring business that the UK is effectively going to remain in the customs union and in the single market, and the Prime Minister herself continuing to say that we are going to take back control of our laws, vary our tariffs, and do, as she said just now, real free trade deals. They can't both be right. Which is it?
The Prime Minister said that we had a legal obligation to pay £39 billion. I wondered if she's forgetting the report of the House of Lords from March 2017 that said in the event of leaving without a deal we owed no money at all. Therefore, what are we buying with £39 billion of taxpayers' money?
The Prime Minister and the whole House knows the mathematics. This will never get through. And even if it did, which it won't, the DUP on who we rely for a majority have said they would then review the confidence and supply agreement. So it's as dead as a dodo. Prime Minister, I plead with you. The House of Commons has never, ever surrendered to anybody, and it won't start now.
Conservative MP Mark Francois saying that the deal, in his view, is dead as a dodo, the words he used. Pretty brutal message, in a rather more polite form, heard by other people too, and really the message delivered to the Prime Minister was pretty consistent, including from the former Conservative Party leader, Ian Duncan-Smith, more recently in the Cabinet as Work and Pension Secretary. Mr Duncan-Smith joins us now. It was relentless, Mr Duncan-Smith. Is there any way at all, in your view, that this deal is going to get through the Commons on the 12th of December?
Well, I don't do numbers on this, I have to tell you, but I simply go with what I believe to be the problem. The problem here, sitting like the elephant in all of this, is this commitment to a backstop. And what was intriguing today, I asked the Prime Minister, you know, given that she keeps saying she doesn't want it, the EU doesn't want it, the Chancellor says it's rubbish, and even Ireland said no matter what they wouldn't have a hard border, why is it there in actual fact? And isn't the real problem with this that when we get into these negotiations on trade, which by the way are not fixed, we'll end up petrified that we're going to fall into this terrible thing that binds us, that takes away our ability to leave from us, all of that, so we'll almost give away anything, and that's exactly where the EU wants us. And in many senses she kind of admits that that's a problem, but we still have this sitting in the legally binding document, and that's the real issue that sits at the heart of all of this, which I think is worrying everybody in the House of Commons, that we'd cede away sovereignty in a way that we've never done before.
But in that sense, you know, is there any surprise given the commitment that was made in this very area nearly a year ago?
Well, no, because I've been going on at the Prime Minister for over a year. I did actually publicly on BBC say to the Prime Minister, please do not sign up to this accord in December, because it gives 39 billion to the EU, and it says that we have to be in this backstop regardless. And we haven't even entered a trade arrangement, and we still really haven't got any kind of idea of what this trade deal is going to be about. But we will have paid all that money over, and we will lock ourselves in to a backstop, which amounts basically to being in the customs union without any let-out, actually having Northern Ireland separated from us by having to align, therefore, a border down the Irish Sea. And the worst element of this is the EU can stop us leaving that arrangement whenever it chooses, because we don't have the absolute right to leave. You know, and they say you can leave NATO, you can leave the UN as a sovereign right, we can even leave Europe as our sovereign right, but we won't be able to leave the backstop without the permission of the EU. That is what everybody on all sides of the House is simply saying. We cannot accept that, and therefore the government has to tell the EU it's simply unacceptable.
I understand that you don't want to get into parliamentary numbers. However, can you help viewers with what is likely to happen, in your view, if this plan of the Prime Minister's is voted down on the 12th of December? What's the next step?
Well, we've always heard of a second vote. My view is that the government, if it's voted down, I actually believe, ironically, that it would strengthen the government's hands. And the reason for this is the government then goes back to the EU and says, look, here's the simple truth. We do not like this. The Parliament won't pass it. At the heart of it lies this incredible commitment which allows the Court of Justice to rule on things and trapping us in this never-ending process of servitude, in a sense, or vassalage. We don't want that. Nobody wants it. Therefore, you either have to take that out, and we have to accept that what we have is a looser arrangement, or the UK government says we are preparing for and will leave into a world of WTO arrangements, which is what the rest of the world works on, including the EU. Now, we would prefer a trade arrangement. We'd prefer to get to that point, but saying to the EU, it's in your interest to get this nonsense out of this agreement, and as we say, the Parliament won't accept it. So I think they've got to go back and renegotiate this bit.
So you don't believe Mr Juncker at all when he said clearly yesterday that there was no room for manoeuvre at all after this?
Well, I don't, because I don't believe that's what the EU internally believes. I visited the EU. I went and met with Monsieur Barnier and his team, and it became quite clear and obvious to me that they already were making preparations for an alternative to this terrible backstop that we've got here, which binds us and locks us in to the very thing that nobody voted for. We didn't vote to be half in, to be locked into the customs union, to have no say, to have Ireland semi-detached from us. All of that, they already know that it's unlikely to get through, and therefore they have to make a change. Otherwise, they have to accept, as one of their MEPs said the other day, that the UK leaving the EU would be like 9 small or medium companies leaving, causing massive disruption without a proper deal. So I think it's in their interest to have a deal, but we need to call their bluff and say, I'm sorry, we can't do this, we won't do it, and Britain will not be in any kind of servile state to the rest of the EU.
Do you have any sympathy at all with the Prime Minister's view? And she said it very clearly several times today that to turn this down in a few weeks will cause massive uncertainty. Business won't like it. It'll cause anxiety and even alarm in some quarters too. For that reason alone, it's worth a punt. That's basically the message.
Well, not really. I think, like anything else, don't gamble on the best endeavours, which is what she kept saying. Always go on what is legally written, and what is legally written is incredibly binding on us and will damage us. Of course, I have sympathy with the Prime Minister because she has a very difficult job, and I've said that today. But that notwithstanding, you cannot pitch your future in trading and your economy on what you think might be the best endeavours of the EU. As I always say, you plan for the worst and hope for the best. We are at the moment, it appears, planning for the best and hoping that that happens, and it just doesn't work like that. Time and time again, in 25 years here, 26 years now, I've sat and listened to reassurances from governments of the Labour Party or the Conservatives about things that won't happen, undertakings they've had, the best endeavours of the EU, and every single time we have ended up getting outvoted, getting change made, and they are heading for a different destination of a centralised Europe. And we are simply not in a position to bind ourselves back into that, and that's why it's really important that we get this legal status completely changed so that we don't bound into this kind of vassalage to the EU, which is what the backstop really amounts to.
And if the Prime Minister resists that and refuses it, as she has done, what do you say and what do you do?
Well, the simple fact is that if they lose the vote, they have to go back to the EU and say, ain't going to fly, and tell them that there's no way they're going to get this through. And then, as I say, I come back to the simple point sometimes, when you look at these things, the best comes out of sometimes the worst. In other words, nobody wants a government, if you're in that government, to lose a vote. But the reality is, if that's what it takes, then the government will have to face up to that afterwards. It means go back and basically say, it doesn't fly, we've got to change it. So my view is the government could do that without the vote. They could do it now. They could accept the fact that the EU are simply barking up the wrong tree, and we need to say to them, I'm sorry, no dice.
Just a blunt question, Mr Duncan Smith. What happens to the Prime Minister's authority if she loses this vote on the 12th of December? You, as a former leader, surely will think that that authority will be shot to pieces.
Well, the Prime Minister's authority does depend to a greater or lesser extent, obviously, on how the party behaves, but it also is slightly different. My view genuinely about this process is that it is so fraught, it has divided all parties, it divides the country, that in actual fact nobody can expect this to be clean and simple and go through. So reality is, and I think as we will see, if the vote does not go the way that the government wants on this particular issue, then I think it's more of a sign to them to say not good enough, go back and sort this out with the EU. It's also a very big signal to the EU that if you don't agree to sort this out, then the UK will still be leaving, but it will be leaving on WTO terms, which will be very damaging to the EU. And that is a key point. We have to be absolutely clear that we have prepared for that eventuality and tell the EU, now the choice is yours. You know, you don't, I mean, they say they don't want the backstop. Here's the irony. They said, we don't want the backstop, we don't want the UK in it. The Irish say they will never have a hard border, regardless of whether the backstop exists or not. The Chancellor says it's terrible and disastrous for the UK. And the Prime Minister today at the dispatch box said she really doesn't want it at all and thinks it will cause problems. So if everybody apparently says the same thing, what in hell's name is it doing in this legally binding text? And the answer is, actually, it suits the purposes of some of those countries to have the UK heading towards this terrible precipice, tumble into the backstop, so they can negotiate more out of us. Well, we have to head that off now.
Mr Duncan Smith, thanks very much for joining us. Ian Duncan Smith, the former Conservative leader there, here with me on the College Green, waiting patiently to the end of that interview. The Conservative MP, Vicky Ford, thanks very much for coming over,
Thank
Vicky.
you.
Well, Ian Duncan Smith is very clear. We need to go back to the EU and tell them this won't fly. Now, is he, in your view, being realistic at all?
I think that's enormously high risk. Listen, we're leaving the EU in 4 months' time. You know, the clock really is ticking. This is a deal which respects the referendum, but really importantly, and I've been with business leaders this morning, the withdrawal agreement gives them the certainty, this transition time, so they don't face the cliff edge in 4 months' time. And that's what they've been asking for ever since the referendum vote. It gives them that certainty to protect jobs, it protects security, it also protects the livelihoods of, you know, the EU citizens that live in my constituency and British relatives overseas. So we really do need to give them that certainty. Yes, there are questions about the long-term future, but we always knew that a trade deal wasn't going to come until after we left, and we always knew that all the other countries would want to say. So I actually think the outline of what we got on over the weekends was a lot more detailed than many people had expected.
Time and again, your former party leader there came back to this issue of the backstop. And this is what he and others have been saying all day, and in previous weeks, of course, you know this better than anyone. I'm basically saying that that alone is a reason, the dangers, as they see it presented by that, alone is a reason to junk this deal.
So, my former party leader is saying one thing, but the Prime Minister is saying another thing really, really clearly. The backstop cannot become the permanent solution. It cannot stay there forever. To do that would be legally unstable, and it's not in the interest of the EU or the UK.
So what's he not understanding about that?
Her statement this afternoon was also very clear that once we put in place measures to protect the Northern Ireland border, to have that frictionless border, then the backstop goes and we can ask for it to go. So that to me is really, really important. But also look at the other options. What are the other options? We leave with no deal. Well, that's hugely uncertain for business and jobs, and I've been with businesses large and small this morning saying they cannot have that and begging us to give them the certainty. Some people are saying they want Norway. Norway gives you no control over any of your rules, including on the services sector, and that's most of our economy. Or they say we want some Canada deal, which again brings you back to the borders issue. That doesn't work at all, in my view. Or then we're into a second referendum, and I certainly don't think that that would help to bring the country back together. So this is the deal that's been negotiated. Any deal needs all 27 countries to agree, and I'm listening to those who've got jobs on the line, who've got livelihoods on the line, and who will be really impacted if this doesn't go through.
How dismayed were you, given what you've just said about the deal, how dismayed were you that so many of your colleagues, a vast majority of them, really had nothing good to say about it?
Well, I think if we want to get a deep trade agreement with the EU, which incidentally was promised to British people before the referendum. They kept being told trade would continue, don't worry, the Germans will want to sell us their cars, trade will continue. If they want that trade agreement, then we need to realise it is a negotiation, and we're much better if we stand united in getting that deal rather than trying to renegotiate it. You know, there isn't, as somebody described it to me, there isn't a golden ticket to a magic chocolate factory. You know, everything has got issues with it. The Prime Minister has been clear this isn't perfect, but it is the deepest and most bespoke trade agreement that the EU has signed with anyone. So I think we should think very, very hard before we reject it. Really hard, because I think the alternatives are all worse.
Well, your message to people is very clear. You know the House of Commons very well, and having listened to that session today, nearly 2 hours now of it, with the Prime Minister still answering questions there, you can't have come away from that thinking that there is a realistic prospect of her carrying that vote, or do you think that?
I think stop and look at the withdrawal agreement again. Look at what the withdrawal agreement does. That's the divorce agreement, which allows us to have that amicable separation. Then we need to go and make sure that we secure the trade agreement. It's always been clear that we wouldn't get that until after we left the EU. That's always been the legal position. So we need to focus on, in my view, protecting jobs, protecting livelihoods, protecting our economic stability at this very uncertain time.
How persuadable are lots of your colleagues? Because I'm asking that question for the reason that you will understand, which is that they are implacably opposed to this deal and they will not be persuaded otherwise.
Sometimes I think those of us who are listening rather than those of us who are on the extremes are not being called quite as often as those on the extremes when it comes to this debate.
Well, you certainly had your say here, Vicky. I'm just wondering again, for the next 2 weeks, what can viewers expect in terms of the Prime Minister's own efforts to try to carry this vote?
So there's a huge amount of pressure on MPs here, but as I said just now, I spent this morning with business organisations from across the country who are meeting in London, who I understand are continuing to talk to the government, and the vast majority of them really do want this withdrawal agreement to go through, because it's that gives them the stability. It gives them the 2-year transition period that means that we can then secure a long-term trade deal. And I believe it's in the interest of the EU as well as the UK to try and have that sort of amicable separation.
But just as a final point, just spell it out for viewers who are just joining us. If this vote is not carried on the 12th of December for the Prime Minister, what would be the consequences
then I am concerned that if this vote is not carried, we either face a very disorderly Brexit, no-deal Brexit, which we've had the Governor of the Bank of England say huge economic consequences, very severe. Businesses are saying that to me as well. Or we get spun into a second referendum, which I believe would be hugely divisive. There are huge divisions in the country, and I don't think a second referendum helps. Or I don't know what happens. This is the withdrawal agreement to buy us the breathing space to allow us to get that long-term trade agreement, and I think we should buy that breathing space.
Vicky Ford, good of you to join us. Thank you very much. Nice to see you again.
You.
Thank you very much. Vicky Ford, the Conservative MP, giving her perspective on the deal and saying basically that her fellow MPs, Conservative and otherwise, should be listening very carefully to the Prime Minister's message and, in Vicky Ford's view, really considering what the potential consequences could be of turning down this deal on the 12th of December. I'm just having a look again inside the Commons. The Prime Minister still on her feet, now nearly 2 hours of session here. And I'm just looking to see there are at least 20 MPs still waiting to ask questions. Why don't we join the Commons once again and see what's going on?
Does not have the support of this House. It is a bad deal. It is bad for my constituents and it is bad for the country. So I ask her, and she has not answered this question yet, what is her plan B when this deal inevitably falls?
I refer the Honourable Lady to the answer I've given earlier.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend for introducing alternative arrangements to the backstop within the lexicography of our Brexit arrangements. That is no mean achievement and may just about get it across the line for a number of us. But can she say what will be done to identify those who are going to work up those alternative arrangements, what budget has been set for that work, and when the matters will be trialled and piloted?
I'm not able to give my honourable friend immediate answers to all of those questions, particularly the questions around trialling and piloting. There are proposals that have been put forward to us. We will be, first of all, I think, here in the UK, obviously looking at those proposals and the extent to which they deliver on what is necessary. And we will be, and have spoken with the European Commission about the possibility then of being able, at an early stage, to discuss with them those alternative proposals.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister and at least one of her cabinet ministers has said that if the House rejects the deal, her deal,
there is a chance of no Brexit at all. And I wonder if she could spell out with greater clarity how this fear might be realised.
I can say to the honourable gentleman that he will have heard a number of individuals around the House today, including some of his colleagues on the Labour benches, who clearly have expressed the view that they believe remaining in the European Union is preferable to leaving the European Union. I believe that it is important for us to deliver on the vote the people took in order and to deliver Brexit.
Gary Streeter.
Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend for living in the real world and for bringing back a deal which does deliver on the 2016 vote without wrecking our economy? Isn't it the case that nobody has put forward a better deal in nearly 2 hours of debate? And does she share my thoughts that isn't it ironic that those who might be scuppering Brexit are the ones who wanted it in the first place?
Well, I think, if I say to my right honourable friend, I think it is absolutely the case that we have not seen an alternative proposal put forward that meets the needs of the British people in terms of the Brexit vote, but also does so in a way that protects jobs and protects our security and our United Kingdom. And as I have said previously, I think when it comes to the vote, we will all need to consider our duty to deliver on the vote of the British people and deliver Brexit.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, Prime Minister, to both the honourable member for Vauxhall and myself, amongst many other colleagues, you have repeatedly, and I'm quoting from Hansard, stressed, I am clear that we will become an independent coastal state and that we will be able to take back that control. We will be able to make those decisions and negotiate on our own behalf on those issues, rather than that being done by the European Union. Prime Minister, there is no capability to carry out this function in the draft withdrawal agreement. Indeed, we have French and Spanish fishermen boasting already of their continued ability to fish as they currently do in our waters. Can you, Prime Minister, explain exactly how our fishing sector will enjoy the benefits of an independent coastal state with control through this so-called deal? Or is this just another, well, it's the best they will offer us, so we'll have to take it and sell off the fishing industry, as you have done Northern Ireland, and for good measure, throw in a 39 million repayment to the EU as well?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that it is, in a number of elements in the political declaration, it's clear that we will be an independent coastal state. What being an independent coastal state means is that we will be able to determine access to our waters, but of course our fishermen will not just want to be looking at the access that others have to our waters, but also at their access to other waters. So there will be a negotiation with the European Union in relation to access to waters, but it will be the UK that will be negotiating on behalf of the UK in that determination. And I apologise because I forget which particular piece of text it is, but there is a clear commitment that that should be undertaken such that, and because the commitment has been made, that we will be an independent coastal state in December 2020, although the implementation period will not have finished, we will be able to negotiate for 2021, because that's when that negotiation will take place, as an independent coastal state.
Prime Minister still taking questions in the House of Commons, with quite a few MPs still waiting their turn. Why don't we just catch up with our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, who's for us in Central Lobby in the Houses of Parliament. That rare thing just now, Vicky, Gary Streeter, the Conservative MP, one of the very few voices that have been unequivocal in their support of the Prime Minister. It's been a very tough session for her.
Yeah, it has. I mean, she's probably almost getting used to it now, standing up in the Commons, taking questions for a very long time, and there just not being that much support for her. Now, there was some quibbling, I think, about the order in which people will be called there, because it was a lot of Brexiteers being called by the Speaker. But, you know, having said that, over the whole session, there is no doubt that this is incredibly difficult for the Prime Minister. And I think what will be most alarming for her team is that at the moment, and the numbers could change of course, but at the moment it doesn't even look close. There are so many Conservative MPs getting up and saying that they don't agree with it, partly because of the Northern Ireland backstop, the idea we could be kept in that against our will, having to take rules with no say over them. But the other issue, I think, put forward by Sir Michael Fallon, a former Cabinet Minister, always been very loyal to the Prime Minister, that was unexpected. Him getting up and saying that effectively the UK has paid over £39 billion and we're taking it on trust that the EU will give us a good trade deal at the end of it. And I think that is an argument that I've been hearing from lots of Conservative MPs who are very concerned
about that, and lots of them talking about the chance to have a second vote, that maybe the first time it would get voted down, then she has to go back and say to the EU, look, this is not going to get through, we have to try and change it. But they, on the other hand, of course, are making it very clear that they are not open to any kind of renegotiation. So a very, very difficult afternoon for the Prime Minister, and it is looking very difficult for her. I think her team would admit that.
And just on that again, Vicky, I mean, what is the sense that you have there of how people think this might go if the vote on the 11th or 12th of December, whichever day it is, if that vote goes against the Prime Minister? What are the main options that people think are then open?
Well, this in some ways is the strongest card the Prime Minister has to play, because the alternatives are very uncertain, and MPs know that. You speak to them here, they are all talking about possible alternatives, even though she is about to go out and take her message around the country, you know, trying to get away from here, and you can see why, having watched that this afternoon, to speak to people directly with a direct message, the practicalities, the pragmatism, as they would put it, about people's jobs. She will explain to people why she's ended up with the deal she has, because she wants to stop freedom of movement, she wants to stop large sums of money going to the EU, but she also wants to make sure that trade is as easy as it can be in order to protect jobs in British industries. But that message clearly is not getting through to MPs here, and so there are others looking at alternatives now. Some are looking at another referendum. It's hard to see how they would get that to happen. Others are talking about a Norway Plus, as they call it, deal where we stay in the European Economic Area. There's cross-party talks about that. But I think a lot of this will hinge on the Labour Party. It will hinge on either Jeremy Corbyn changing his view and coming behind one of those things, or enough Labour MPs deciding to do it. So all of it is very uncertain, and at the moment that looks like a strong card for the Prime Minister to say to people, look, if you vote this down, you cannot be sure of what you're going to get, and for different reasons that could feed into how MPs decide to vote.
Vicky, for now, thanks very much. Obviously, any big developments there, again, we'll be back to you straight away. What I'd like to do now is to just consider, at this moment, at 5:32, what are the hurdles left then to clear before Britain leaves the EU next March, because that's when it's set to happen. And with me is Chris Morris from the BBC's Reality Check. Chris, how do you see it?
Well, what we saw yesterday was the other 27 countries endorsing the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. Eventually they will have to officially approve it, but that will come at the end of the process. It could be by a qualified majority of EU countries, that's 20 out of 27, but this is an issue of such gravity, I think it would be extraordinary if it were anything other than a unanimous decision. But before that, the biggest hurdle, we've been talking about it all afternoon, you've been discussing it for the last half hour. Can it get through this place? If the deal, let's be clear, is not ratified in the House of Commons, it cannot become law, and we will not leave the European Union with the Prime Minister's deal in place. If it does get ratified here, if the numbers are found by the whips and by the government, then the next step in ratification would be in the European Parliament. I'm told that process would take 4 to 6 weeks. And I think they're looking at having a vote on ratifying in the European Parliament, perhaps as late as March, just a few weeks before we're due to leave. They have concerns about citizens' rights, but I think the process there will be much less complicated than it is here at Westminster. Only then, if all those steps are taken, do we leave on the 29th of March next year. And of course then a 21-month or more transition period begins, and only after the 29th of March can we actually begin formal negotiations on the future relationship.
The one thing mentioned time and again by Ian Duncan-Smith and others today, Chris, was this issue of the so-called backstop. You and I have discussed this many times, you've explained it many times, and yet today another kind of difference of opinion on what exactly that represents. For Mr Duncan-Smith, it is possibly a trapdoor into which Britain will fall and never come out again. But then other Conservative MPs, Vicky Ford, coming along here and saying that's not the case. How can they be misunderstanding, if they are, this concept that is now written down very clearly?
I think it's because it's, the withdrawal agreement is a legal treaty, and there is the potential there that it could last a very long time, this backstop, because both sides have to agree for it to come to an end if this single customs territory, basically a temporary customs union, is implemented, and neither side can withdraw from it unilaterally. But and I think this is a really important point. It's not just the UK that doesn't like the backstop. The EU really doesn't like it either. I can think of 3 reasons. Number one, it would mean them subcontracting, if you like, control of their borders around Northern Ireland to a third country, the United Kingdom. Number two, they still think, despite all the conditions that have been put in, that the UK could somehow get some kind of competitive advantage by being half in and half out. Thirdly, probably most importantly actually, for their future trade relations with countries around the world, the backstop's a bit of a disaster. Because if you have a temporary customs union with the UK, other countries are going to say, well, hang on, are we negotiating with 27 or 28? If it's 28, then for how long? And if the answer is, we don't know, that's not a good look for any kind of trade negotiator from other countries. So it's certainly true that the EU doesn't like the backstop either. The problem is, though, and this, I listened to Vicky Ford, the problem is it's not going to be easy to find this future trade relationship that will solve the Irish border problem, because the EU continues to insist that if you want frictionless trade, a completely open border, and I know a lot of Brexiteers dispute this, they say the only way to do that is staying in the single market and the customs union. And that's the elephant in the room. That big choice has been deferred, and that's the big argument again still to come.
Hence the kind of hybrid deal that Mrs May has come up with to try to square the circle.
Hence the complex stuff that officials have spent months and months poring over to get the legal text right to try and square the circle. But you know, the big choice really between economic access and sovereignty has still been kicked down the road, and we've been arguing about it for the last 2 years. For the next 2 years and more, it's going to be a central argument as well.
Chris, once again, thanks very much. Chris Morris there, the BBC's Reality Check, with his expert view on what's been going on and indeed what lies ahead in the months to come, with a lot of uncertainty built in, as we know. The time is 5:36 here at Westminster. We've been covering the Prime Minister's statement on the deal that she has negotiated with the European Union, and as we've been saying, Mrs May facing lots of criticism on all sides of the House of Commons over that deal, and she is still taking questions now. Why don't we pause and catch up with all the day's sports news now and join Azzy. Hi there.
Hi Hugh, thank you very much. Joe Root has praised a complete squad effort after England completed the series whitewash of Sri Lanka. It's only the 3rd time in history that England have won all the matches at an away test series, as Andy Swiss reports.
It's all over. The perfect ending to what on paper's been a perfect series, but how England had to work for it. Sri Lanka's target of 327 had looked impossible, but no one appeared to have told Kusal Mendis. Suddenly the hosts had hope, but just when England needed something special, they found it.
Direct hits, that might be what get England going.
Jack Leach with the flash of brilliance, Mendis gone for 86, along seemingly with Sri Lanka's chances, as England's spinners once again turned things their way. Soon they needed just one more wicket, with the hosts still needing more than 100, surely all over. Not quite, as Sri Lanka's final pair blazed away, but amid the rising tension, Leach held his nerve.
Again, what do they think this time? Gone!
Replays confirmed it was hitting the stumps, and at last England could celebrate. Their first series whitewash in Sri Lanka. It was some fight, but some feat. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
And this is how England celebrated that historic series win back in the changing room. That was Captain Joe Root there on the guitar, although I'm not sure there's much coming out of it. And the rest of the squad singing along. Ireland coach Joe Schmidt will step down after next year's World Cup, and he'll be replaced by Andy Farrell. Farrell's been Ireland's defence coach under Schmidt after holding the same position with England up until the 2015 World Cup. It'll be his first head coach role, and he'll have big boots to fill. Schmidt guided Ireland to 3 Six Nation Grand Slams and 2nd in the world rankings. Formula 3 driver Sophia Flörsch says she's happy to be on her way home after the high-speed crash that left her with a fractured spine. Flörsch crashed at around 170 miles an hour at the Macau Grand Prix 8 days ago and needed an 11-hour operation to repair her spine. She says the day of the crash was like a second birthday, and she's looking forward to getting her life back.
It was my first ever big crash, and it took me some while to get over it, but I'm over it now, and I think now a new chapter starts. And yeah, as I said, it was a bad crash, but Dallara built a very, very good, stable chassis, and I'm still here walking, everything is good, and I'll be back racing. and chasing my dream.
There's a big Premier League match tonight for two sides struggling to get going this season as Burnley host Newcastle. Despite winning their last two matches, Newcastle boss Rafa Benitez could be forgiven for being a little bit more nervous than normal heading into this one. That's because they've lost 11 of their last 12 Premier League games that have been played on a Monday night, and the international break came just as they were hitting form.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's true that when you are doing well, the international break is changing everything, and sometimes when you have injuries, give you a little bit more space for players, more time for players to recover. So I think you have to take it like it's coming, and hopefully we can carry on winning. So always I say it's a long race, the long distance race, and we started walking, now we are running, hopefully we can sprint.
And that's all the sport for now. You can find more on those stories at the BBC Sport website. That's bbc.co.uk/sport.
Azzy, many thanks, and we'll see you later on at the BBC Sports Centre. Back here at Westminster, the time is 5:40, and the session in the Commons still going on, with the Prime Minister still taking questions on the statement that she made at 3:30 today, 2 hours and 10 minutes ago, and basically answering a lot of criticism from her own side and indeed on the opposition benches on the Brexit deal that she has put together. Lots of question marks around the date. The assumption was it would be the 12th of December, but now we can clarify when exactly that parliamentary vote will take place. Let's join Vicky Young again, our chief political correspondent. Vicky, when will it be?
It will be Tuesday the 11th of December. Conservative MPs in the minutes have all been looking at their phones. They've been sent an email by the Chief Whip, and in that it confirms that the first day of debate will be on Tuesday the 4th of December. They will have the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, then the 10th and 11th, and so Tuesday the 11th the vote will be that day, and MPs here saying that would be a normal 7 o'clock vote, so 7 o'clock in the evening for that vote. So not that long for Theresa May to try and turn around the opinion of so many in her party, as we were hearing a little earlier in that statement, which is still going on in the House of Commons. Theresa May still on her feet there, taking questions which I think latterly have been more supportive than they were in the first hour, but still I don't think anyone in her team would think that that was a reassuring afternoon in the House of Commons for the Prime Minister. It really does look like an uphill task for her, albeit she's going to go out around the country appealing directly to people, hoping, I think, that constituents or Conservative Party associations might put pressure on their MPs to fall in behind her plan, but it's going to be very, very tricky.
That's an interesting point, isn't it, Vicky? Because when we had all that talk of a possible leadership challenge last week and the week before, there was quite a lot of talk there about constituency parties putting pressure on their MPs not to rock the vote. Do you think you'll see a repeat on this one?
I don't think it would be as widespread. It's not quite the same. I think it's an easier argument if you're a Conservative association to say to your MP, hang on a minute, we don't need a leadership contest now. You can't, throw her out at this crucial point. But I suppose on the issue of substance, people feel very strongly about this, although I have spoken to some Tory MPs who've said that they will take guidance from their local party, and they will be also hearing from their local businesses. We've had people on this afternoon, Conservative MPs, saying that they are listening to local businesses who above all want certainty now, with just not that long to go until we leave. They want to have something in place. They want to be sure that they can have this transition period, this implementation period of 20 months where nothing much changes. They feel they need that, and I don't think there are many people here, not many at all, who would say that the country is ready for a no-deal situation, even though there are, of course, some MPs who think that is desirable. The alternatives are still being looked at and definitely still being talked about here by all sorts of MPs from all parties.
Vicky, many thanks once again. Vicky Young, our chief political correspondent there, just inside the Houses of